Our next guest for the night is Neil Blumenthal. He's a co-founder and co-CEO of Warby Parker. Um, there's a lot of ways to describe Warby Parker, but I think it's the company that basically made consumer brands exciting again and changed the way we shop. It's nothing but one of the most innovative companies in the world. And so when we talk about changes in demand in retail, I thought who better to have on than one of the co-founders of Warby Parker. So Neil, thank you for joining the stage. I'm
Thanks
really
for
excited to
having
have
me.
you on. You know, you have a big company. You have the online channel, your omni-channel. You have 100 plus retail locations and a history of innovation. I'd like to cover over the next few minutes how COVID's basically impacted those different parts of the business. Um, so first thing is, how have you changed? You probably had a 2020 plan that's no longer valid. So how have you
That's an
changed it? Like,
understatement.
do you have a plan for the rest of years? It's still being figured out. So how do you go about managing this?
Yeah, so, right, COVID has changed everything. It has materially impacted, right, all of our lives, professionally and personally. And it certainly took any business's annual plan and threw it out the window. And before throwing it out the window, it ripped it up into a million pieces. We were monitoring COVID back when we were just calling it the coronavirus back in November and December. And at that point, we were really viewing this as a supply chain risk, right? We were seeing how is this going to impact production? How is this going to impact transportation? Because we do some of our frame production in China. We also do frame production in Japan and Italy. Little did we know how quickly those countries would also be affected. But we started to pull inventory up sooner. So that way, if there was a supply chain disruption, we'd be able to weather the storm. Well, that enterprise risk quickly changed from a supply chain disruption to a health and safety issue for our team and our customers, as well as a potential major risk to customer demand. So then we started planning, okay, what do we have to do to keep our employees and our team safe? One of the things that we did was change the way that we operated our stores, where we had greeters to avoid crowding. We had guided experiences where we had EPA-approved disinfected wipes, and we would wipe down every single frame before someone tried it on and after they tried it on. And then quickly, when it looked like things started to get worse, we were one of the first national retailers to close all of our stores, and we closed 120 stores literally overnight. And we also had moved our offices to mandatory work from home. We had a voluntary work from home in place. And I look back and that we didn't have government guidance. And unfortunately, as we look, most governments have been way too slow to respond, whether you look at what's happened in Europe or what's happened here in North America. So we've been having to operate based on the best information that we can glean for the health and safety of our team and our customers.
Wow, that was a very thorough answer, and there's a lot to unpack there. So I got to start with the first question. How did you notice in November, December? I think I thought I was early watching in January. So how does your team, or how do you look for risks, and especially, how do you observe it so early?
So one of, I think, the roles of a CEO is some form of surveillance, not the negative form of surveillance, but like in the public health term, and that is speak to many other both in your industry, outside of your industry, in your market, outside of your market, to be understanding what's going on, so that way you can see around corners to some degree. And then, right, the point of also good governance and a board is to be identifying risks and having some plan in place to mitigate those risks. So, one of the core things that we do at our board meetings is talk through those enterprise risks. One of the big things that we do as part of our audit committee, which is part of our board, is to think through risks. And usually the top of the list are like cybersecurity risks, maybe reputational or brand risk, right? If something really negative were to happen. But quickly, right, this supply chain risk, and we didn't think that there was going to be a pandemic. We just thought that there might be risks to the supply chain.
And what did you end up having a supply chain disruption, or did you act in time?
So we acted in time. It's actually really surprising, in talking to a lot of CEOs at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, right? The whole world is very dependent on manufacturing in China. And there was a lot of talk on how do we reduce our dependency on China, and not just because of China, but because to have so much production in a single country is risk. You have almost a single point of failure. Again, even though we were doing some producing in other countries, right, most companies are very dependent on China. So those conversations over the last few months have completely shifted from let's mitigate risk by moving production out of China to, what, Chinese producers have actually weathered this storm really effectively and almost didn't miss a beat. So one could argue that Chinese manufacturing is more resilient than manufacturing almost anywhere else. Other things that we did is we have an optical lab about an hour outside of New York City where our headquarters is. And that's where we cut the lenses and insert the lenses into our frames. It's a light manufacturing facility. We quickly had to institute safety measures like screening to enter the facility where, when people are waiting to be screened, they're spaced out every 6 feet. We do temperature checks. We had to rearrange our production line to ensure that if people are working on a production line, that they're maintaining safe distances over 6 feet apart, having mandatory hand washing throughout the day, wearing of masks, staggering lunches, and creating multiple places for people to have lunch so that people aren't congregating. So, right, we've had to quickly become experts in things that there weren't sort of best practices adhered to globally.
So that's I find it very interesting that you've been impressed by Chinese resilience, and that you may argue against diversification of supply base. I want to flip. There's a question there, which I think what I wanted to get to was, how do you see a future of physical retail changing? You have 120 plus stores. They're closed now. What do you think? When do they reopen, and what changes when they reopen?
So I wish I had a crystal ball and knew when they'd reopen, right? So these 120 stores across the US and Canada. One thing that we do know is that they're not all going to open up at once. Right, it's going to open based on local conditions. So it might be market by market. And then within a given market, not all the stores are likely going to open at once. And that's for two reasons. One is that we want to ensure that we're doing this responsibly for the safety of our customers and our team, and also to gauge sort of customer demand, because we know from markets that have had shutdowns, like in China, like in Japan, like in Korea, and then have started to reopen, sales volumes don't immediately return overnight. Not just because there might not be customer demand, but also because it's not safe to do so, right? We can't have our stores be as packed as they usually are, because we're going to have to do crowd control and maybe, maintain 50% of the occupancy that we would typically have. So we'll have safety measures where, we're thinking about how do we make sure that people aren't, touching surfaces, because that's a risk of spreading. How do we ensure that folks are wearing masks and washing hands? Before we closed stores, we did have Purell everywhere, and we had people greeting and encouraging folks to wash their hands upon entry. Actually, a funny story is at one point when there started to be Purell shortages, we had people coming into our stores and refilling their personal Purell bottles with the Purell that we had in the store.
So it sounds like you're expecting retail to change for a while. It sounds like consumer behaviors might be changing. I believe lots of DTC brands opened up retail locations because it's cost effective and to get further customer penetration. Is this going to push back to more of a focus from an omnichannel perspective on digital, or do you think do you think there's no difference?
Um, I I think that this is accelerating a lot of trends that we already saw, right? Pretty much any category there has been over the last 10 years, right? A monumental shift to e-commerce. And that's now just going faster, right? There was already a shift to streaming when it comes to media. Right now, that's just accelerated. Buying prescription drugs, right? Why on earth are you going to walk into a CVS where a lot of other sick people are going to get their drugs when you could, use capsule or pill pack and have it delivered directly to your home, sometimes even within sort of an hour or two, literally the same time frame of walking into a place. On the same token, right, there's some categories that are going to get hit, and stay hit for a while. And I think about categories within travel. And when you think about customer acquisition costs, for example, media prices are falling. And one of the main reasons is because the travel sector is such a large advertiser, right? And they've pulled back their spending. Now we're seeing lower media rates, we're seeing lower acquisition costs, but we also sell an essential product, glasses that people need and will continue to buy in a situation like this. So lower media prices for us means lower customer acquisition costs. There are some categories who, if people aren't searching for and don't have an appetite to buy, irrespective of low media costs, it's not going to lower your acquisition costs because you have to hit that many more people to get a bite at the apple.
Interesting. I'm going to take a question from our audience. There's Pune asked, your product doesn't have seasonality. What is your advice for those retailers that have high seasonality to their category as we see changes to supply chain and slow store traffic?
I wish I had an easy answer here. I think it's really complicated. And that's why you're seeing so much discounting, right? Particularly in apparel. People want to get that inventory off the shelf. And the name of the game in a crisis like this is flexibility. And flexibility could mean, right, smaller inventory buys, focusing more on the tried and true products as opposed to going, with niche products, right, pulling in a little bit, smaller, more frequent orders as opposed to big, large orders. So it's just, right, if you don't know what's going on and you're in uncertain times, how do you maintain as much flexibility as possible?
Interesting. So I like that answer, being flexible, and it sounds like learning. Pranav asks, hi, Neil, what digital initiatives have helped you in meeting consumer demands during COVID? And I have a follow-up question for that. So I'd love to hear what digital initiatives have you done?
Sure. So we've always invested a lot in innovation. And one of the features that I'm most proud of that we developed internally was our virtual try-on. So if you have an iPhone 10 or higher, we use a true depth camera. We got early access to the AR kit. So that way we could actually create the world's first true to scale virtual try-on, where you hold your iPhone, you look at yourself, and the frames actually appear in the exact same size, fit as they would, because we built an algorithm that determines where on your nose bridge those frames would fit. So that's helping people find glasses. It's helping people purchase. We've also developed this prescription check app where people are able to do a simple vision test, and we're able to renew their prescription if their prescription has expired. So those are the types of tools that more and more people are using with us today.
Yeah, and we have lots of questions about your innovation because I think you're known for it. But just gonna ask one more question because we only have 15 minutes of your time, and we really appreciate it. The last question there is from Rob Green. Are you looking at this as an acquisition opportunity for smaller brands that have niche penetration?
We're always open to ideas. We've never done an acquisition, and we definitely don't when we see a crisis, yes, we want to manage through it, but we want to emerge stronger than ever. And we're certainly looking for lots of opportunities. But at the moment, I think a lot of those opportunities are internal. How do we make smart decisions on how do we prioritize certain types of work that are going to drive short-term sales? How do we support our team emotionally and financially through this, so that way when we do see the light at the end of the tunnel, that we can come out, out of the gates swinging.
So I'll ask you one last question. What is the one thing a DTC founder can do to emerge stronger from the current crisis?
Bold, decisive action. So, really to start, strong cash management, really understanding all of your expenses, trying to delay as many payments as possible without destroying your relationships with vendors and landlords and whomever. Making sure you're spending money only on the things that are the most important right now. So strong cash management, strong team leadership, and that's about being transparent, being direct with your team, being present, which is immensely harder when you're remote. So you need to just be more proactive in every form of communication with your team.
Neil, thank you so much for your time. I think those are great words of wisdom, and I have a feeling you have presence no matter where you are.